The car died on a road I could not name, in a country I barely knew, and for the first time in 40 years, no one in the world knew where I was. I stood there in the silence of the Moroccan hills, watching the sun bleed into the Atlas Mountains, and I understood something I had forgotten. Fame means nothing when you are lost. Money cannot start an engine, and a man without direction is just a man. That silence. I will never forget that silence. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something older, something that had been waiting there long before I arrived, and would remain long after I was gone. I had driven out of Fez that morning, chasing solitude, the way some men chase fortune. The rental car had seemed reliable enough. The map had seemed clear enough. But the road had narrowed, then turned to gravel, then to dust. And somewhere along the way, I had made a choice that led me here. To nothing. To nowhere. I tried the ignition again. The engine coughed once and fell silent. The hills were empty. No houses. No telephone wires. Just olive trees twisted by decades of wind and the fading light. And me. I started walking. A man my age should know better than to walk alone into the unknown at dusk. But standing still felt like surrender, and I have never been good at surrender. I walked for perhaps an hour. The sky deepened, from orange to purple to black. Stars appeared, more stars than I had seen in years, and I thought about how small we become when we step outside the circles we have drawn for ourselves. Then I saw the headlights. A truck rounded the bend, old and battered, its engine rumbling like a man clearing his throat. It slowed as it approached, then stopped. A window rolled down, and a face appeared. Dark eyes, gray beard, a wool cap pulled low. The man spoke in French. My French is passable, enough to explain my situation. He listened, nodded, then gestured toward the back of the truck. I climbed in. We drove in silence for 20 minutes, winding through hills I could not see, until we reached a village that was little more than a cluster of white houses, gathered around one single well. The truck stopped in front of a modest home with a blue door. The man stepped out and spoke to me in slow, careful French. His name was Ibrahim. This was his home. I was welcome to stay until morning, when his neighbor could look at my car. I thanked him. I meant it. The door opened before we reached it. A woman stood there, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp with curiosity. Ibrahim's wife, Fatima. She looked at me the way you look at a stray animal that has wandered onto your land. Not with suspicion, with calculation. She was deciding how much this stranger would need. The answer, apparently, was everything. Within minutes I was seated at a low table, a glass of mint tea warming my hands, a plate of bread and olives appearing before me. Fatima moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had fed unexpected guests 1,000 times. Ibrahim sat across from me, asking careful questions. Where was I from? What brought me to Morocco? Whether I had family waiting somewhere? I answered honestly. I was an actor. I was traveling alone. And no, there was no one waiting. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Then there was a knock at the door. Ibrahim rose to answer it. I heard voices, a brief exchange, and then footsteps. A second man entered the room, shorter than Ibrahim, with a trimmed white beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a small embroidered cap on his head, and when he saw me, he smiled. This is David, Ibrahim said. My neighbor. David extended his hand. His grip was firm, his French flavored with an accent I could not place. He sat down beside me at the table, and Fatima brought him tea without being asked. I watched them. There was something in the way they moved around each other. Something practiced. something old. Ibrahim passed the bread to David before he asked for it. David refilled Ibrahim's tea glass when it ran low. Their rhythm was seamless, the rhythm of men who had shared meals at this table for decades. It was not until later that night, when the conversation had wound through politics and weather and the price of grain, that I understood. David mentioned his synagogue. The word landed softly, but it landed. I looked at Ibrahim. He was smiling, the kind of smile that comes from a private joke shared with an old friend. "You seem surprised," David said. "I was." He laughed, a full, warm laugh that filled the small room. "Everyone is surprised," he said. "They expect us to hate each other. They have been told we must hate each other." He gestured toward Ibrahim. "We have been neighbors for 43 years. Our fathers were neighbors before us. His grandfather helped my grandfather hide during the war, when the Germans came looking for Jews." He paused. "Hatred is a choice. We chose differently." Ibrahim nodded. He said something in Arabic, and David responded in the same language, and both men laughed at something I could not understand. Fatima appeared with more tea. "I stayed for 3 days. The car," David explained, "needed a part that had to be ordered from Fez. A messenger would bring it, but not until Thursday. Until then, I was their guest. I should have been restless. I am not a man who sits still easily. Back in California, 3 idle days would have driven me half mad. I would have paced. I would have telephoned someone. I would have found a way to force the world to move at my speed. But something about that village held me in place. Something I needed to understand. The silence there was different from the silence I knew. It was not empty. It was full. Full of history. Full of choices made long before I arrived. Full of something I could not yet name. I watched them. On the first morning, I woke to the sound of prayer. Ibrahim's voice, low and rhythmic, drifting through the walls. I lay in the small bed they had prepared for me and listened. When the prayer ended, I heard another sound. A different melody. David's voice, coming from the house next door, offering his own morning devotion. 2 prayers, 2 traditions, rising into the same dawn. I lay there listening until both voices faded into the sounds of the waking village. Roosters, children, the clatter of pots, the ordinary music of ordinary life. And I thought about all the places I had been, where men killed each other over the differences between those 2 prayers. I thought about the headlines, the wars, the hatred that sold newspapers and filled theaters. None of it existed here. Here, there was only the dawn, and 2 old friends greeting it in their own ways. Later that day, I sat with David in his workshop as he examined my car's broken fuel pump. His hands were stained with grease, but they moved with precision. Tools hung on the walls in neat rows, each one in its place, each one worn smooth by years of use. A photograph was pinned above the workbench. 2 young men, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. I recognized Ibrahim's eyes, David's smile. He saw me looking. 1951, he said. He talked as he worked. He told me about his family. 4 generations in this village. His great-grandfather had been a skilled silversmith. His grandfather a merchant. His father a teacher. "And you?" I asked. "What are you?" He smiled. "I am whatever my neighbor needs me to be." That evening, I witnessed something I will never forget. Ibrahim's grandson had fallen ill, a fever that would not break. The boy lay in the back room, pale and shivering, while his mother pressed cool cloths to his forehead. Ibrahim paced. Fatima prayed. And then David arrived. He came without being called. He brought medicine from his own cabinet. Herbs, he said his grandmother had used, for the same affliction. He sat beside the boy's bed and spoke to him quietly, telling stories, making the child laugh, even through his discomfort. I watched Ibrahim's face as David cared for his grandson. There was no gratitude there. Gratitude implies a debt. What I saw was something deeper. Recognition. This is who we are. This is what we do for each other. The fever broke before midnight. I watched them carry the sleeping boy back to his bed. I watched Ibrahim clasp David's hand and hold it for a long moment without speaking. I watched David nod once, a small gesture that carried the weight of decades. Words would have been too much. Words would have been too little. What passed between them needed no translation. I went to sleep that night thinking about my own neighbors. I could not recall their names. On my last evening, the two families gathered for dinner. David's wife, Rachel, brought a dish of fish cooked with preserved lemons. Fatima served lamb with prunes and almonds. The table groaned under the weight of it all. Bread, olives, honey. The children ran between the houses, belonging to neither and both. A boy with Ibrahim's eyes wore a cap that Rachel had knitted. A girl with David's curly hair sang a song that Fatima had taught her. The boundaries that the outside world insisted upon simply did not exist here. They had been erased by decades of shared meals, shared sorrows, shared joys. I sat at the edge of the table, watching. David and Ibrahim argued about a football match. Their voices rose. Their hands gestured wildly. And for a moment I thought they might come to blows. Then Ibrahim said something, and David burst out laughing. And they embraced, like brothers. Rachel leaned toward me. They have this same argument every week, she said, about the same match. It happened in 1962. Neither of them remembers it correctly. I smiled. Why do they keep arguing? Because, she said, it gives them something to forgive each other for. I thought about that for a long time. After dinner, Ibrahim and David walked me to the edge of the village. The stars were out again, thick as spilled salt across the black sky. We stood in silence, three men, looking up at something larger than ourselves. You are troubled, Ibrahim said. It was not a question. I was. I had spent my career playing righteous men. Men who stood for justice. Men who defended the innocent. I had memorized their words, inhabited their convictions, made audiences believe that such men existed. But standing there, in that small village between the mountains and the desert, I realized I had never truly seen it. Not like this. Not lived. Not quiet. Not ordinary. These two men did not perform their decency. They did not announce it. They simply lived it, day after day, in 1,000 small choices that no one would ever applaud. David seemed to read my thoughts. You want to know the secret, he said. I nodded. He pointed at Ibrahim. I do not love him because he is Muslim. I love him because when my father was dying, he sat with him for 7 nights. He held his hand. He told him stories. He was there when I could not be. He lowered his hand. The religion does not matter. The person matters. The choice matters. Every morning, I choose him. Every morning, he chooses me. That is all. That is everything. The fuel pump arrived the next day. David installed it himself, refusing payment. I drove away from that village with something I had not expected to find. Not peace. Exactly. Something harder. A question I would carry for the rest of my life. What would the world look like if everyone chose the way they chose? I never saw them again. I never returned to that village. I am not even certain I could find it now, but I think about them. More than I think about the films. More than I think about the awards. More than I think about any of the roles I played. I think about 2 old men arguing about a football match from 1962. I think about a fever breaking at midnight. I think about 2 prayers rising into the same dawn. And I think about what David said. The religion does not matter. The person matters. The choice matters. I have made my living pretending to be heroes. But those two men, in their quiet village, in their ordinary lives, showed me what heroism actually looks like. It looks like a cup of tea offered without hesitation. It looks like a hand held through a long night. It looks like 43 years of choosing, every single morning, to see your neighbor as your brother. I drove back to Fez that afternoon. The road was clearer than I remembered, the turns less confusing, but I was not the same man who had gotten lost 3 days before. Some losses, I discovered, are gifts. Some wrong turns lead exactly where you need to go. And some lessons can only be learned when you are far from everything you know. Standing in the dark, waiting for a stranger to offer you a hand.